Today's critique examines a commentary piece analyzing the UK government's proposed media bill that mandates digital video platforms to prioritize traditional public service broadcasters.
Right, the new prominence mandates.
Yeah. So, a key theme running through this material seems to be the tension between organic audience growth and top-down institutional control. Let's look closely at the opening section, though.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because, the opening narrative about the studio temperature really distracts from the pressing urgency of the core political argument here.
It really does. We are talking about a broken air conditioner, 100-degree heat outside.
Yeah, wearing a tank top.
Right, wearing a tank top, having 2 fans blowing in the author's studio. It spends a full 2 paragraphs exploring this really specific physical discomfort.
Just sweating it out.
Exactly. And then it tries to transition into this whimsical imagining of UK broadcast studios being chilled to a perfect 68 degrees before finally attempting to pivot to the concept of government overreach.
I can see what they're going for here.
Sure, yeah.
It's an attempt to establish this, conversational, intimate bond with the reader before getting into heavy policy. It sets a relatable scene.
It sets a scene, but I really have to question if it's the appropriate scene for a commentary aiming to unpack a constitutional-level threat to digital free expression.
Yeah, I see your point.
The weakness here is a severe tonal whiplash. Like when you open with a deeply personal, mundane anecdote about HVAC issues, you signal to the audience that they are in for a casual slice-of-life vlog post.
So you're saying it messes with the reader's cognitive load.
Hours and algorithmic suppression.
It's jarring.
Yeah, the reader experiences a jarring bait and switch. They arrive at the actual political threat feeling completely disoriented, having wasted all this mental energy visualizing a sweating recording studio instead of grasping the stakes of the legislation.
It's like starting a suspense thriller with a 10-page description of the detective's commute.
Yes, exactly.
The detail might be factually true to the author's day, but it actively stalls the momentum of the argument. So the suggestion here is to repurpose the environmental anecdote into a sharp thematic metaphor that smoothly bridges into the main topic.
Or just cut it entirely, right?
Yeah, or cut it. The opening should immediately establish the author's credibility and the significance of the topic.
So if we want to preserve the author's voice and keep the heat motif, how do we make it work for the argument rather than against it?
Well, the temperature needs to serve as a springboard, not a detour.
Right.
Let's look at a concrete way to execute that. Instead of a literal diary entry about the weather, you could write something like, it is boiling in my studio today, but the heat independent creators are feeling in the UK right now is far worse due to a chilling new media bill.
Oh, I like that. That immediately connects the personal setting to the political stakes. You keep the stylistic flair, but you weaponize it.
Exactly.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of immediate impact? Like, if the goal is maximum journalistic urgency, we just bypass the personal altogether.
Right, just get straight to the point.
Yeah, consider cutting the AC talk completely and opening with a punchy hook. Something like, the UK government is advancing plans to force platforms like YouTube and TikTok to push BBC and ITV content onto your front page, completely overriding user choice.
That's strong. The audience instantly understands the mechanical threat, the actors involved, and why their own digital experience is at risk.
Right.
So once the opening effectively hooks the audience into those stakes, the piece relies heavily on comparing these UK legislative actions to the recent history of the US media landscape.
Which brings us to the precise mechanics of how the author constructs this transatlantic comparison.
Yeah, because conflating the UK's legislative mandates with corporate algorithmic choices in the US weakens the central thesis about state censorship.
This is a critical structural vulnerability in the analysis. The material claims that what is happening in the UK right now already happened in the US, right?
Yeah.
They point to YouTube's decision around 2019 to elevate legacy mainstream sites like Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that it's just, this with extra steps. But is it?
That's clearly laid out, yeah. I wonder, though, if we've considered how legal force changes the equation.
Because one is a private company tweaking its own code, right? And the other is a nation-state stepping in.
You've hit the exact weakness. The author fails to distinguish between a private corporation voluntarily tweaking its algorithmic classifier and a government using the coercive threat of statutory law to mandate prominence.
Right. Treating these as identical scenarios dilutes the specific threat of state-sponsored coercion.
Exact. When YouTube shifted its algorithm in the US, we have to look at the mechanics of why they did it. They had just gone through multiple adpocalypses, remember?
Oh, yeah. Advertisers were pulling out everywhere.
Right, because their ads were running next to edgy or unvetted independent content. So YouTube made a voluntary commercial calculation. They artificially boosted legacy networks to ensure brand safety and keep advertising revenue flowing.
So it was a private market decision, however flawed it might have been for independent creators.
Yes. And what the UK government is proposing with this media bill is mechanically and legally entirely different.
They are demanding mandated prominence.
Yes.
From what I understand, this means forcing tech platforms to alter their UI, like perhaps creating a fixed carousel for public service broadcasters that completely supersedes the user's actual personalization vector.
Right, which inadvertently minimizes the danger if you just compare it to 2019. If an American reader thinks, well, YouTube already did this to us in 2019 and the sky didn't fall, they will just dismiss the severity of the UK bill.
So the suggestion here is to acknowledge the critical difference between corporate bias and legal mandates.
Yes, using this distinction will actually strengthen the warning to the US audience. It frames the UK bill not just as a repeat of 2019, but as a terrifying escalation of government power over digital platforms.
It shows what happens when the state realizes it can legally commandeer the digital infrastructure that a private corporation built.
Exactly.
Let's give a concrete example of how to execute the structural fix. The author's own text points out a great detail. UK Media Minister Ian Murray originally wanted platforms to make these changes voluntarily, right?
Yeah, and when they didn't, the government resorted to what the author calls shitty legislation.
Right. This is the perfect pivot point to highlight the escalation.
They could revise this comparative section to explicitly state, while U.S. platforms voluntarily shifted their algorithms toward legacy media in 2019, the UK is crossing a new line by using the threat of law to mandate.
That really clarifies the mechanics of power. It's the difference between, like, a landlord changing the locks and the police kicking the door down.
That's a great way to put it. And building on that, demonstrate how the UK broadcasters, like ITV, explicitly require public subsidies and legislative intervention because they cannot compete organically.
Right. It comes down to their legacy models. These institutions rely on massive public subsidies, specifically a TV license fee legally required by citizens.
Contrast this with U.S. cable networks that, while flawed, are navigating a private free market.
Exactly. If CNN's ratings drop, they lose money. In the UK, if ITV can't get digital views organically, they just lobby the government to force the algorithm to serve their videos.
The author has all the puzzle pieces to make this brilliant economic argument, but leaves them scattered by just saying, it's the same as 2019.
But, pointing out that government coercion is different from corporate policies really only half the battle.
True.
Understanding the exact legal mechanisms of this overreach naturally leads us to how the author engages with the government's official justifications for these legal mechanisms.
Right. If we want to truly dismantle the UK government's bill, we have to look at their actual defense.
And the piece brings in direct quotes from the people pushing this legislation, which is a fantastic editorial instinct.
It is.
However, relying on broad labels to dismiss the government's stated goals overlooks an opportunity to systematically dismantle their actual arguments.
This is a classic trap in passionate political commentary, right? The writer gathers the raw material for a devastating structural counterargument, but abandons it at the last second for a quick emotional hit.
Yeah, when analyzing the government's claim that this bill is meant to combat the tide of misinformation and disinformation and elevate trusted sources, the material simply translates this as meaning we are fascists.
Right, and similarly, it mocks ITV CEO Carolyn McCall as a dinosaur.
I mean, while this is passionate, relying on ad hominem attacks preaches to the choir and completely misses the chance to logically deconstruct the flaws in the legacy media's own statements.
If a reader already hates the media bill, they might nod along, but if you are trying to persuade a skeptical reader, name-calling completely flatlines the pacing. It signals to the reader that the author has run out of factual arguments.
I have to play devil's advocate for a moment, though. Isn't calling ITV a dinosaur technically accurate in this context? I mean, their business model is nearing extinction and they are incapable of adapting to the digital climate.
Well, it might be a broadly accurate sentiment, but as an analytical tool, it lets them off the hook.
How so?
By just calling her a dinosaur, you ignore the much more damning reality of what she is actually confessing to on record. She is admitting capital inefficiency.
Ah, I see. So the suggestion is to quote the specific reasoning from the government's policy paper or legacy media leaders and counter those points using the strong evidence already present in the source material.
Exactly. Specifically, YouTube's own internal defense about audience trust.
Let's apply this directly to the ITV CEO's quote. Carolyn McCall talks about the challenges of sustaining these investments, referencing overheads that cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
Instead of just throwing out the dinosaur label, the author should use their own excellent observation about alternative platforms like Rumble to counter her argument mechanically.
Yeah, that makes sense. But could the evidence also support a more analytical conclusion? You could argue McCall wants to protect their $100 million overhead, but as we've seen with platforms like Rumble, when users feel the zone is being artificially flooded with corporate media, they don't watch it. They abandon the platform entirely.
Wow. Yeah. That takes the argument from a playground insult to a forensic dissection. You're explaining mathematically and psychologically why her legislative bailout will ultimately fail.
We need to apply this exact same surgical approach to the government's claim about fighting misinformation.
Right. The Culture Secretary insists this bill is a necessary measure to ensure citizens have better access to trusted news.
And again, the author's knee-jerk reaction is to label this as fascist control. But there is a goldmine of evidence in the author's own notes that structurally destroys the Culture Secretary's premise.
The piece references the Watch This Space consultation. Just to clarify the mechanics here for a second, this isn't just a vague government slogan, right?
No, it's a formal policy document seeking industry feedback before the bill becomes law.
Right. And the author highlights that YouTube actually submitted a formal response to this consultation through David Wielden, their Director of Government Affairs in the UK.
And what did YouTube say?
They explicitly warned the UK government that forcing priority destroys the creator-audience bond.
Right. They argued that mandating prominence for legacy broadcasters fundamentally implies that digital-first voices are less credible. Exactly. YouTube's data indicates this doesn't create trust. It actively damages the foundational trust that sustains the entire creator economy.
This is the ultimate weapon for the author, but it's currently buried under the emotional rhetoric. I'm honestly amazed that the piece doesn't center this entirely.
It happens when we get too close to the material, you know? We feel the anger of the censorship, and we overlook the incredible corporate ally we found in the research. YouTube is actively, formally lobbying on behalf of the author's exact thesis.
We have to lean into that.
We really do.
The concrete suggestion here is to use YouTube's own corporate warnings as your weapon. When the Culture Secretary claims this fights misinformation, counter it by pointing out YouTube's exact warning to UK creators.
Right. You could write, the government claims this bill fosters trust, but YouTube's own internal data warns of the exact opposite. By legally implying that independent creators are less credible than state-subsidized television, the UK government isn't fighting misinformation. They are actively destroying the foundational trust of the modern digital economy.
That phrasing completely neutralizes the government's defense. It takes the subjective emotion out of the critique and replaces it with cold, hard industry pushback.
It really elevates the entire piece. The foundational elements of a top-tier political and economic analysis are all sitting right here in the source material.
They just need to be structurally aligned and mechanically explained so they hit with maximum force.
It really is a fascinating dive into how media consumption is changing, how algorithms actually function behind the curtain, and the desperate ways legacy institutions try to maintain their grip on the narrative.
So to maximize the impact of this piece, let's recap the main actionable steps. First, streamline the opening to focus directly on the urgency of the UK media bill. Drop or adapt the air conditioning anecdote.
Second, clarify the critical legal distinction between UK state mandates and U.S. corporate algorithmic choices. Add a sentence clarifying that difference, specifically outlining the economic bloatedness of the UK license fee model.
And finally, elevate the counterarguments by systematically dismantling the government's stated goals with logic rather than labels. Swap out the fascist and dinosaur name calling for rigorous analysis of the ITV CEO's quotes using YouTube's own pushback data.
Prove that forced prominence actually destroys platform trust and drives audience abandonment.
Exactly. We warmly invite you to implement these structural and rhetorical adjustments and submit your revised draft back to the critique for another look. Because at the end of the day, when the government is mandating exactly what encyclopedias go on the front table, you don't want your readers distracted by the weather outside. You want them focused entirely on the censorship happening right in front of them.